I hope everyone had a great lunch. We're set to begin. It is my pleasure to present to you today Dr. Derhan Wong-Rieger from the Canadian Organization of Rare Disorders.
Thank you very much. Despite what you saw on the agenda, I'm not talking about any strike. I have no idea how that became part of the title. I'm actually going to talk to you hopefully about the rare disease drug strategy. So we're going to talk a bit about the drug strategy. And I kind of asked, I think I'm going to start from the very beginning and take us all the way through to the access for drugs, even though I know many of you are already very, very familiar with how the drug system works here. But there may be others not, and it's good for us all to be on the same page. So what I want to do is talk a bit about how drugs are actually approved in Canada, how they're actually reviewed in terms of making them accessible, and then how they're actually reimbursed. Talk to you in the context of the rare disease drug strategy that was implemented 2 years ago now in Canada, what that means in terms of the ability to have better, faster access to drugs, and also what the future might be in terms of a drug strategy moving forward in terms of the overall system for supporting drugs. Make sense? Okay, so next slide. Keeps clicking. This is the only one that has several pieces to it. So I think as you've heard today, you heard a lot of excitement about new drugs. And I think for patients, the idea of having a new drug, right, it's this great excitement. This is what's coming. I think the challenge, and those of you who have been with us, I mean, good gosh, Anne-Marie, it must be, 10 years since we first started on this path? And I think it was with the people like Ionis and Alnylam that were bringing in those drugs. I mean, there were no drugs for amyloidosis. There was nobody even talking about amyloidosis. And if you talk about ATTR, except for, a few people like Dr. Fine, nobody knew what the heck you were talking about. So this is actually a huge advance in terms of where we are in terms of awareness and knowledge. But I think today still, that second box still holds, is that once we get the drugs, and they are in fact known to you and coming available, getting them to the patients is still kind of a black box. We don't really know what happens, and because we don't really know what happens, we know some of it, we can't really do a whole lot to actually make it a lot better. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about what we do know, what we don't know, and how we have been able to advance access despite all of this, but it's a far from perfect system. Okay, next slide, please. So here's kind of the basics of it, as you've already heard, right? In the beginning, there's development. You got to be able to develop the drugs. And a lot what you heard, even in this last panel, right, was how do we develop these drugs? How do we get researchers involved, and certainly academic researchers, nonprofit researchers, patient group-sponsored research, but also drug companies, the early stage research, what happens there? We got to get the drugs developed. But once they're developed and they get to a stage where, as you were talking about, they get through the clinical trials to say, okay, we think this drug might work, you still got to get them to people beyond that clinical trials. Yesterday, I was speaking to an audience for Huntington's disease. Many of you will know what Huntington's disease is for some of us, I mean, it's kind of like one of the worst diseases in the world, right? It is a combination of ALS, Alzheimer's, and all the neurodegenerative diseases that you can think of. You do not want to have Huntington's disease. Not that you want to have any disease, but my husband, and some of you will know him, he passed away from Parkinson's about a month ago. I mean, Parkinson's a piece of cake compared to Huntington's disease, right? And even that is a very, debilitating disease. So, but they're very excited because they're getting their first drugs. They're kind of where amyloidosis was maybe about 10 years ago, or maybe even a step back from that, right? But we're talking about what are you going to need to do to bring these drugs to the market, to people? And the question I asked was, when do you think you need to start working on creating the awareness and getting pathways for those drugs? And the answer is, even though you may be 2, 3, 4 years out, the answer is now. because it takes that long in order to get a drug from the point where it's actually gone through the clinical trials to get them to people who need them. So we've got to get them to the market, as we call it. And then, of course, even after they get approved, and you've got, I can talk to you about the different steps of it. It says, okay, we believe they're safe, we believe they're effective. That doesn't mean that anybody's going to pay for it. The coverage of these drugs is actually another long and tedious process. Those of you who've been involved in it for a long time, you know that. Those of you who are just coming into it, you know, it's sort of like take a breath, because it's going to be a long journey in terms of getting actual drug coverage. And we say public drug coverage because even as you know, we've got two systems of coverage in this country. We've got private drug plans and we've got public drug plans. Most of the rare disease drugs end up in the public drug plans. And today, for many of the amyloidosis, there's a combination. But that's, you know, not always the case. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick little snapshot of letting you see how complicated the drug process is. Why does it take so long to get a drug to the patient? It takes a long time because it's a complicated process and because there's lots of different agencies involved. Okay, so it isn't as if I come into Canada, I've got a new drug, I'm going to bring it in, get approval for it, and we can start marketing it. We can start making it available to people. It goes through lots of steps. And some of the steps is around how do we make sure it's safe and effective. Some of the steps go around to how do we decide what is the right price to pay for it, and is, in fact, it not only affordable, but is it cost effective? Should we be paying for it? It works, it's safe, people want it, but should we as a public drug plan, should we as a public health program, should we be paying for this drug? And you might think, well, why not? I mean, it works, right? We should make it available. As with anything else, when we're talking about it, it really depends. So this shows the different processes involved. You will see there's two sides to it. There's the private side, and then there is the public side. And the next slide, if you go to it, it'll show you a little bit more clearly. This is the challenge we've got. If we're talking about a drug that has to have public funding that is going to be paid for out of in this case, we're talking about in Canada, we have 13, maybe 14 different public drug plans. We have 13 jurisdictions that do healthcare, and they are not related to each other. Each separate jurisdiction, those of you know that. If you live in Alberta, you cannot come into Ontario and expect to get healthcare under the public system, unless you're in an emergency situation. It doesn't work, right? Each jurisdiction does its own. The same with the drug plans. So if you're getting a public drug plans, the public drug plan in Alberta does not look like Ontario, does not look like Quebec, does not look like BC, does not look like Saskatchewan. They're unique drug plans. And each of the provinces and territories will decide what drugs are available, to whom are they made available, and under what circumstances you will be able to continue to get access to them. Now that makes anything to make any sense. It's the same drug, same population, same criteria. You should be able to say, okay, why is it different? It's just different. It's just different because each province does it differently. They have their own criteria. But that means it's very challenging in terms of, especially for rare disease drugs, when the patient population is so small. So, I mean, we've got families, right, that have relatives that live across the country. And depending on what province they live in, some of the members of that family get access to the drugs, and guess what? Some of them don't. And that's, you know, the sadness of our system, the way it works there. So if you're talking about a drug getting paid for by the public system, you look at the left side of this drawing, and you can see there are many different landing spots you have. It has to get Health Canada approval. Everybody has to do that. It has to be approved by the federal government, by Health Canada, and we can speak a little bit more about what they're looking at there, but it has to get approval to even be sold in Canada. Then, though, it also has to get pricing. A public price has to be set, and there's a maximum price that we can sell for in Canada. It has to go through a process that we call health technology assessment to decide. Hey, health technology assessment is a stupid set of words. It means nothing, you know? Even if you understand what health technology assessment, right? Those of you who know health technology assessment, what does it mean? It means nothing. It means that we're gonna look at the drugs and we're not, Health Canada's already said they're safe. Health Canada's already said they work. Then we have two bodies, one in in Quebec and one for the rest of Canada, Canada's Drug Agency and INS, which are going to say, yeah, we kind of think they work, and they've already said they work and they're approved, but we're going to look at slightly different things, right? And we'll talk a little bit about what they're looking at. Basically, they're looking at, and in this case, when you talk about amyloidosis, and you're talking about especially like ATTR, where there's already drugs, the question is, how well do they work relative to what we already have? Is there an added advantage? How much of an advantage is there? Should we actually be making more space in to bring in another drug? And quite frankly, if we do, how much do we want to pay for it? So it's really looking at making it available to people on slightly different criteria and what they call, what's the place in therapy? Is there an added benefit to bringing this drug? Now, you would think that it doesn't matter. It's like a grocery store, right? So we have 12 different flavors of pop on the shelf. It's not the same thing. They're basically saying, I got a pop on the shelf. It looks really good, works really well. People like it, they drink it. Now you want to bring in another one. The question is, what's the added benefit of bringing that one in? That's what they're going to ask you. What added advantage does it have? It's another flavor. People get a choice. No, you don't get a choice, and another flavor is not good enough. How much better is it? So we're going to have that assessment done. And then we actually still have to negotiate a price then. What are we going to pay for it? If it's slightly better, which hopefully it is, if it's a new therapy, how much better is it? Oh, it's going to be this much better. It's going to give you 6 more months of life. It gives you fewer symptoms. It's easier to take, so you don't have to take time off from work. If it's for children, it's going to be to slow down their disease early on, so they're not be as disabled. How much better advantage is that than the current drug? If it's a significant advantage, how much do I still want to pay for it, though? How do I decide how much 6 months of life is worth? How much do I decide whether or not being able to walk, independently for a long time? How much is that worth? Somebody's got to put a number on it. And this is what some of this agency does. It seems very arbitrary, but it's exactly what happens. And so you negotiate then a price. And hopefully you get to an agreement on the price. But I will tell you, sometimes we don't get an agreement on a price. Sometimes the company says it's worth this is what I'm selling it for, and this is what everybody else in the world's paying for it, and then Canada says, I don't think that's good enough. We want it less than that. Sometimes you can negotiate, and sometimes one of the parties walks away. So you look at the right-hand side, that's the private drug plan side. If you have a private drug plan, you get to go from square zero all the way to access. Maybe. Not so easy. Once upon a time, that was the case. Today, it's not the case. Partly because these rare disease drugs, it's not just that they're expensive, but there's lots of other caveats that we'll talk about in terms of these drugs. And you heard it today as you were talking about the development of it and the challenges in getting it through the development, et cetera. Okay, private drug plans, how many of you have a private drug plan? Are they unlimited? Do you get as many drugs as you want from them? Forever? If you have an open access plan that gives you all the drugs you want forever at whatever cost, you're lucky. That's very few plans that are like that. Most of them are much more limited, right? Most of them may say, okay, your top limit for the year may be $1 million. It may say you have a lifetime limit of $5 million. It may say that if you want to spend this much on this drug, nobody else in your family then is going to get any access because you've used up all the monies, right? So private drug plans are not that magnificent anymore. Private drug plans also are a lot more likely to balk at the price of it, but they don't have the negotiating power that the provinces will. So they may not be able to say, we don't like that price, we're going to negotiate with you for a lower price. We're going to say, I don't know, you've got a handful of people that are on this drug, not worth it for us to negotiate a price with you because it may affect our rest of our pricing. So private drug plans, once upon a time, were great. They do not work that well for public, for rare disease drugs. A lot of people that need a rare disease drug end up in the public plan because your private plan can't settle it. Creates other kinds of problems, which we won't get into now. Next slide. So this is what I just talked about. Health Canada looks at quality, safety, and efficacy. That's all they look at. Does it work? Does it have adverse effects? Do the benefits outweigh the adverse effects? Next slide. These are the two agencies we were talking about. These are your so-called health technology assessment agencies. They're going to look at it and say, how what is its place in therapy? How much is it better than current therapies? Now, you can remember when amyloidosis drugs first came out, there was no other drug except for some old maintenance kind of drugs, steroids and other things, right? And so it almost was an easy question. How much better is it than your existing drug? Well, it's a whole lot better because really you have very little. On the other hand, none of these drugs that are coming out are what we call home runs. You're not necessarily getting a drug, right, that you can look at and say, yes, we know it has all of these amazing benefits, and yes, it's going to last and have those benefits are going to last forever, and yes, we can be assured that there are no safety issues because with rare disease drugs, what's the size of a normal clinical trial? How many people, if you're doing a cardiovascular drug, a diabetes drug, you're doing a cancer drug, how many people are usually in a clinical trial? Hundreds, thousands, right? How long do these trials last? They last for years, right? When you've got a drug for a rare disease, especially if it's one in which there's no other treatments, how big a trial do you can you have? We were talking to the Huntington's people. They have 12 people in this trial. 12 people so far. They've been on it for 3 years. That's a long time for them to have been on it. And the question is, does it really work? And the answer is, we're not sure. It seems to be working for those 12 people that are on the drugs, or not even all the 12 people that are on the drugs. This is the challenge we've got, right? Big clinical trials, we can say, okay, 75% of the people got better because you've got large numbers. 75% of 12 people is like 9 people got better, and 3 people maybe did or did not get better, and we're not sure why they didn't get better and why this 12 did. And does this mean it expands to the population? So there's a challenge. Small patient populations, it's really hard, even if you get good results, to say, are those results really, really extrapolated to the whole population? Should we be giving them therapy? Second thing is, even in terms of that, the measure of what works or doesn't work. I mean, how do you know if a drug for amyloidosis works? Well, you may have biomarkers that show that some of the reduction in terms of that amyloid buildup, right? It's happening. But what does that really mean, Dr. Fine? So goody, you've got patients that have less levels of amyloid. Can you tell me how that affects their quality of life? Can you tell me if it's actually going to make them function a lot better? And can you tell me for how long this effect is going to last? No. What's the matter? I mean, and you're telling me you want me to fund this drug and make it available to people. We don't know, right? This is the challenge we've got. Small patient populations, new therapies, and even more importantly, the measures that we're looking at do not necessarily translate into better, longer health outcomes. With cancer, okay, I'm reducing the size of the tumor. We're pretty sure that you're taking care of the cancer. And if your tumor size goes down, after many, many years of trials, right, we believe that means that you will actually live longer. But we aren't absolutely sure because the cancer may come back. But again, we've had lots of research and over many years. I don't have very much with amyloidosis. I don't really know. So these are the challenges we've got with these rare disease drugs, right? So it's a real case to be able to make the statement to say, okay, we've got sometimes we don't even have a placebo. Or sometimes if we do it against a placebo, when it goes to this agency, they say, yeah, you looked at it against a placebo, but guess what? Nobody's on placebo anymore. They're all on this standard of care. Can you show me the evidence to say your drug does better than this standard of care? You say, no, it does better than nothing. Well, okay, but nobody's on nothing. So it's the challenges we've got in terms of providing the evidence to this body to get them to say, okay, we think this drug really does provide that added benefit. It would be easy if the drugs were cheap. And this is no dispersion to the companies. And I'm not here to defend the company pricing, nor am I here to cast any dispersions on the pricing. But you know these are not cheap drugs. A lot of the times they're not cheap drugs, because they are for small patient populations. If I got a drug that serves millions of people, I can make it fairly cheap. I mean, think about aspirin, it's been around for a long time, et cetera. If I've got a drug, quite frankly, has a lot of competitors, I might be willing to kind of think about adjusting my prices, but sometimes, even with, drugs coming in for a small population, they're fairly niche. It's better for this type of patient than it is for this type of patient. So there's not a lot of, quote, competition in that space. But beyond that, there's also the challenge. I mean, you were listening to some of the discussions here as well. I mean, and it's still a truism. People say, oh, it's cheaper to make and do clinical trials for rare disease drugs because the patient population is small. Yeah, that's true. The trouble is the rate of failure is actually quite high. How many drugs do you have, how much research do you have to do, and how much does the academic researchers do? How many academic researchers actually get a drug that succeeds on the market? Very, very, very few, maybe 1 in 1,000. Even when a company gets a drug and they're making it available, it will still be a high rate of failure. So, as we say, you're also having to pay for all of that back research that went into it. So again, I'm not here to defend or to support, or to cast, dispersions on a price of a drug. It's just to say we understand that rare disease drugs are going to cost more. And, when you hear that, the good part of that is that, in many respects, of course, the size of the patient population is small. They cost a lot because the population is small. But because the size of the patient population is small, the impact on the overall public budget is also very small. So anyway, you have to get through the CADTH position. We've come a long ways with CADTH. Once upon a time, when I first started working in this space, CADTH said no to every single rare disease drug. Of all the reasons I told you, a lot of uncertainty, small patient populations, we cannot extrapolate beyond it, and it costs too much. We got to the point maybe about 10 years ago where about 20% of those drugs were getting a yes, most of them were getting no's. Today, we're up to about 76, 80% yeses on these rare disease drugs. And it says a lot. I mean, Health Canada got a lot better in being able to look at novel clinical trial designs. Not big populations, little populations, not 2-arm trials, single-arm trials, not phase 3 trials where we've gotten them into, a larger kind of population. We'll look at phase 2 trials that are still we're still collecting the evidence on it. CADTH, or now CDA, for a long time said no. We don't want to take those trials. Even when Canada said they were good, they said, no, we don't like that evidence. Now they've been convinced. And I really will say it's really been the advocacy community, the patient community, that's been able to push it. For them to look at the fact it's a small patient population. There's a high unmet need that's there. There really is the importance of being able to provide some margins because we don't have as good of a long-term evidence between the biomarker and the quality of life. It's not there. That being said, that still is very challenging. And we still have drugs that are going to get a no from it because they don't like one of those parameters. So it's still a high risk. And the other thing that does happen is they absolutely do not like the price. We use a very old mark of what is a cost effectiveness in Canada. And I won't go into deep details on it, but it's enough to say, for them to say, we will approve this drug and we'll make it available, but you company have to give us a 90% reduction in the price. Now, that's a pretty daunting idea. It's like you wanting to go buy a house and you say, look, I got $200,000. And they said, okay, it's a $4 million house. And they said, well, we'll negotiate on the price. Tell me how this negotiation is going to go and how easy it's going to be to come to a common agreement. This is kind of the problem we have sometimes, okay? Or they will say, okay, we're going to approve it, and this still happens, right? But we're going to give it to a very, very small population. I heard some of the people talking here, why can't it go to this? I can get it for here. What they will look at very narrowly, they may go all the way back to who was in the clinical trials. Now, you know that clinical trials does not represent everybody, right? It's not a random assessment of people. They're usually people in the clinical trials that are the ones that are most likely to demonstrate the drug works. They want people that have not too advanced state of disease. They want people that haven't had other treatments. They want people that are actually going to be the ones that are going to be the best candidates for that drug, because they're trying to show the impact of it. Unfortunately, then when it's made available to everybody, a group like the CDA will look at it and say, wait, you don't meet that profile. You're not the same as that. You have much more advanced disease. You've got other kinds of issues. You've got other kinds of underlying issues. You've got other organ diseases. We don't want to give you this drug. So this is the challenge. Health Canada may have said, look, we assume because of the way in which the drug works, it's going to work for you even if your disease is more advanced. I remember one of the early days we had, for instance, with Pompe disease, a child. This was a drug for a lysosomal storage disease, early stage disease. it builds up. It's sort of like the amyloid built up. It builds up with fatty substances, so your body cannot get rid of glycogen, and it causes then other kinds of organ damage, etc. One of the versions that always affects children, and it ends up with cardiovascular disease, cardiomyopathy. For children with a severe form of it, they would usually die by the time they're 1 to 2 years old. Company developed the drug. They did the clinical trials only on infants under the age of 1 with cardiomyopathy. They wanted to get the kids that were severely affected, want to demonstrate it, and that would be also where they demonstrate most likely that it worked well. Did the clinical trials, it worked remarkably well. Health Canada approved it. It went to, at that time, CATA CDA, and they said, okay, that's fine, we see the evidence, it looks good. We'll only make it available to children under the age of 1 who already have developed cardiomyopathy. Now, that's a very small portion of that overall population. In fact, I don't think we had another child in Canada with those conditions for like 4 years. In the meantime, we had kids that were older, we had adults that had the disease for whom it would also work amazingly well. And then Health Canada said, yeah, we'll give it to everybody. It should work because it's the mechanism of the action in terms of being able to remove that excess glycogen. Anyway, it took us years, almost on a patient-by-patient basis, to get it available to other patients. I think today it is pretty much changed to be the standard, but it was fought over many years, patient by patient. So this is what happens, right, when you start to look at this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, you think you're done. Okay, finally you get a recommendation from CATA that says, good news, you can have the drug. No, it has to go to PCPA. Remember I said that. This is the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. They negotiate the price of the drug. And remember what I said, sometimes with a rare disease drug, the recommendation is 75% reduction, 80% reduction, 90% reduction. We have one drug I know of today that's a 99% reduction in price. So we're willing to list it if you, company, are willing to reduce your price from whatever it is, down to 1% of that price. It's not an easy start. So this is what this agency does. It helps it. The challenge with it takes a very long time to do it too. Next slide, I'll show you. They do agreements for the provinces. It used to be you'd have to go province to province to negotiate a price. Now this one agency does it for all the provinces, and the provinces then, if they're to list that drug, will do it at that price. But the provinces does not have to list that drug. It still has to go to each one of the provinces and territories, even after prices come, to say, okay, I will put it on my formulary, or I will make it available through special access. If they make it available, the price is set. But they don't have to make it available. And today we have the same situation, right? Where drugs are available, haven't gone all the way through the system, that are available in only some provinces and not others, for not necessarily good reason. And again, they have the advocacy to try to get them available. So, next slide. Private plans, I kind of went over that. I'll go beyond it. Yeah, they don't get to negotiate, but they used to be great, now they're less so, and especially they don't work that well with rare diseases. And we have all kinds of situations where people max out their private plans, and we have people that, you know, are forced to go onto the public plan, but then they have to abandon their private plan entirely, which is just an absolute travesty. We do not make it easy. Next slide. So this is what we said, that the current pathway is long and it's very challenging. Next slide, I won't belabor it, I already talked about it. This shows the timelines. The timelines are very long. And I was listening to Colleen talking to somebody here at the beginning. She said, how long is it going to take? It could take another 12 months, 15 months from the time it gets approval before you get access. Now, some of you may be lucky. You may already have another drug that works. Some of you may not. But it means that once a drug becomes available, it's known to you and it's approved, it still could take you many, many months before you're able to get access to it. So this is, a real problem in the Canadian system. It's a problem in the Canadian system not only because it takes you so long, it discourages manufacturers from coming to Canada. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of cost to submit a drug to the regulator. It costs another $750,000 to send it over to get a technology assessment. And then it costs to have people involved to do all the negotiations. And basically, what companies are saying is, why do I want to go to Canada? especially if it's a small patient population, especially if it's going to take me all this time to get access to it. And especially if they're going to tell me I have to reduce my pricing, because there's some kind of an international pricing that goes on. You can't just say, okay, I'll make it real cheap for one country and I'll make it real expensive for another country. We do that. The US pays an inordinate share. But most other countries, you end up with about the same price. So Canada is not a very inviting place for drugs, and certainly not for rare disease drugs, at least up to now. Okay, so let's move on. We have good news coming. I know this sounds like a gloomy story, so those of you who are very excited before on Christmas time with your new drugs. Next slide, please. So this show, okay, beyond just how long it takes an ordinary drug, rare disease drugs take even longer than a regular drug. And this is not surprising, as I've talked about this kind of really challenging scenario. It just takes a whole lot longer. And quite frankly, as we say, because there is so much challenge around each stage of it. Next slide, please. So what has happened? I'm going to just flip through some of the things. I mean, we've been on an advocacy campaign since the first rare disease drugs came into Canada, right? This is one of the first drugs I ever worked on back in like 2006. This is the drug for one of the versions of those lysosomal storage diseases that we talked about. It was the first very expensive drug to come to Canada for rare diseases. It's about $300,000 a year for the drug. In today's thinking it's not that much, but it certainly was a shock at the time, because most drugs at that time were like $30,000, maybe $60,000. So here was a rare disease drug for $300,000. We actually did a lot of advocacy, did a lot of campaigning, had a national campaign going on before we finally got access to the drug. I won't tell you sometimes if you want, I can give you the real interesting stories of how we actually managed to stage an intervention at a health ministers meeting and force the health ministers to interact with the patient population. And at the end of that interaction, we got them to agree, okay, we'll make available a drug. But it takes a lot. Next slide. This is a little 14-year-old girl. Some of you may know her. She was the first patient with cystic fibrosis to make the advocacy for access to drugs. Many of you will know cystic fibrosis is not an easy disease, right? It's one in which it not only affects the lungs, it affects other organs of your body. And many patients with cystic fibrosis would die in their mid-30s, besides having a very challenging life in terms of being able to manage the amount of phlegm that's in their system and other damage to it. We got a drug approved. And she became, I guess she was 12 when she started, was 14, by the time she got done with 2 years of pleading for access to the drug, she actually had private funding for it. She just thought it was a tragedy that nobody else was getting it. And she became an ambassador for this drug and, made the case and really opened up, I think, again, access to a very challenging drug. I remember one of the health ministers that she was standing there in front of. He was asked later, what was the most difficult role you had as a health minister? What's the most difficult time you had? He says, you have a 14-year-old girl standing in front of you with the cameras rolling, asking you why you're not funding her drug. That is not an easy thing to do, but it's not also easy. I mean, this is not the way it should be, right? You should not have to put children out there in front of the cameras to be pleading for access to a drug, but that's what it takes sometimes. Next slide. So this is one of the ones you all know. SMA is one of the miracle drug diseases of the century, really starting off with a very difficult drug that you had to infuse into the spinal cord. Our first go-around with Catalyst was no. This is a life-saving therapy for children who are born with a debilitating condition, like an early stage of muscular dystrophy. The first drug that worked to actually allow children who would, if they had a severe form of it, by the time they were 1 year old, would no longer be able to eat or breathe on their own, lost the ability to crawl. This drug actually restored those functions. Amazing drug, and government says no. It took a long campaign. What happened in the course of it, and this is kind of what you see, not quite as miraculous in the amyloidosis community. The first drug was good. It worked very well. It was a very difficult path of infusion because children had to get a needle in their spine every 6 weeks in order to get the drug. Second drug came out was a gene therapy. It was absolutely miraculous. A one-time infusion, actually a very easy infusion, and it's not even into the spine. Cost $2 million. It was our first really expensive gene therapy. The good news was, because this drug, the intrathecal version of it, had already been approved after a long advocacy campaign, and it caused, first infusion was $700,000, each one after that was $170,000. When the gene therapy came out, we could make a case. A one-time gene therapy was going to be as cost-effective as years on a much more difficult drug. This is kind of where that kind of comparative effectiveness works. If we had not had this drug at the time the gene therapy came out, I don't know that we would have gotten the gene therapy, because it would have been like $2 million. Are you kidding? Because it would have been $2 million compared to nothing, which was what the kids had before. Now it was $2 million against, okay, maybe $300,000, $400,000 a year. So after a few years, we've paid for the gene therapy, which of course was highly effective. So as we say, even if drugs are coming in, they're just starting to come in, get them, make them available, because you will build on that. But it took a lot of advocacy, and in the beginning, the government said no to the gene therapy. Now the challenge was that this gene therapy had to be infused before the kids were 2 years old. Parents, of course, not willing to wait, because it still took about 2 years, even after the drug was approved, even after the CDA said, okay, we think so, it took another 2 years to negotiate the price on the drug. And parents said, we can't wait, because our kids are going to age out. This is the biggest public funding campaign I've ever seen, a charity campaign. Parents took to, GoFundMe. They were able to raise $2 million to get this treatment for their kids because it was such a compelling case. But that's not the way it should be. And there were some parents, of course, who couldn't make the $2 million mark, whose kids did not get the drug in time. That's not the way it should be. So, again, you see all the big gaps that we have. Next slide. This is more of it in terms of those same kids. Next slide. Different kids. This is how it will be. This is one in which, the lovely thing about it, we're talking about screening and diagnosis. What's the most effective way to get a screening and diagnostic program? You have an effective drug. Once we got a drug that was effective, we could make a case for newborn screening for SMA. Because if we can diagnose these children before they are symptomatic, and we can get them treated, they will actually grow up to be perfectly normally functioning kids. But we have to diagnose them. And in many cases, next slide, I think I'll show you the next slide here. These children were not diagnosed until they were close to over 2 years old. We have to make a hard case for them to even begin to approach treatment because they already begun to lose the ability to walk. In fact, I don't think they fully recovered that. But the challenge is, once we've got the drug, we can make a case for screening and diagnosis. You heard this morning, I was shocked to hear that there are maybe 10,000, 17,000 people that ought to be diagnosed in Canada. This is the challenge, right? But if you get a drug, you can do a better job of diagnosis. Some of you will know Ian Stedman, who's on our board of directors, who's on, Ian. He was diagnosed at about the age of 30-something with this disease. He tells it, I have to correct him on the story, actually. He actually had lived this entire life with autoinflammatory disease, lots of outbreaks in terms of fevers, and it really interfered in terms of his work, et cetera, et cetera. His daughter was born. He got married, had a daughter, and he recognized she had the same symptoms. Nobody could ever diagnose them. They just kept telling me, oh, you're getting fevers. You just kind of take medicines to reduce the fevers, right? Actually, it was causing a whole lot more damage to his body. His daughter was born, and he says, I want to find out what's causing this disease, because he recognized now, okay, it's an inherited disease. We didn't know that. Went to sick kids and got a diagnosis for his daughter. She got diagnosed and got on treatment. He subsequently got a diagnosis, but I have to remind Ian, the only reason that the doctor was able to identify that disease as well as he did, because we had a treatment, and the companies were doing major education and awareness to the physicians. In many cases, these were kids that came into emergency rooms and came to emergency rooms maybe once a month all the time and just kept getting turned back because nobody could diagnose them. We got a diagnosis. So this is the beauty of having a treatment, is you can work backwards. Well, you know that as well in terms of Landau disease. Once we get a treatment, you can now do the education. You got some doctors who might be a little bit reluctant to diagnose you unless you've got a treatment. Why should I give you a diagnosis? Why should I work so hard to get a diagnosis if there's nothing I can do about it anyway? I mean, not because they're lazy or anything else, it's just that there's no added benefit. But now there's an added benefit. So this is what we're talking about, right, in terms of the system. Next slide. This was another case in which this is a Luxturna. It's a gene therapy for one specific form of blindness. And what happens is that patients begin to lose sight in their cones. Gene therapy, if it's injected, can actually stop disease progression. It has to be injected into the eyeball, which sounds awful, but as everybody keeps telling us, the eyeball has no nerve, so you don't feel it. So the drug was available. The drug had been approved for almost 6-7 years in the US and was available. In Canada, we took a long time not only to get approval, it was approved and they wouldn't fund it. In fact, it sat there to be negotiated for like 2 to 4 years. In the meantime, this was one of the children we have, siblings. You usually would lose your eyesight with this disease by the time you're about 16, 17. The older boy that was turning 17 years old, he was losing sight. He was going to go away to school. He was actually a concert pianist. He was an excellent, student. Trying to fight to get him access to the therapy before he lost his eyesight. And what he was really didn't want to do was end up in school, right? Having to be somebody without sight and being dependent. We were losing time. It took 2.5, 3, 4 years with flat out advocacy, newspapers, and stories all over to get him access to the treatment. His sister had been in a clinical trial in the States, and she had one eye done. It could be in the other eye. So she had great sight in one eye. She wanted to get the other eye done. I mean, this is the kind of thing that almost seems ludicrous. We couldn't get it to them because we couldn't get agreement. They had a private drug plan. The private drug plan said, if the public drug plan won't fund it, we won't either. This is kind of like the catch-22 that you get in. We finally did get him the treatment. It didn't reverse the sight that he had lost, but it kept him from not having sight. Next slide. So as I say, good news is that we're approving more drugs. Next slide. I got to get to the drug strategy. This again. Quebec, for some reason, is not approving rare disease drugs at the same positive level that CDA is. It used to be Quebec was better. Now Quebec has gone backwards. No, seriously, they seem to be approving fewer drugs. This is very sad. And, remember, this is the same drug, the same set of clinical trials, the same criteria, the same kind of, pathway. And one of the health technology assessments says, okay, we can approve that. Another one will say, no, we don't think so. We don't like the evidence, and we don't think it's good enough. So this is right in Canada. This is a challenge, I mean, it's fairly arbitrary. That's why I say it's still a black box, because we don't really know exactly why yes and what no and what's happening there. Next slide. So this just shows that for the most part, we're paying for these therapies, especially high-priced ones. Next slide. Okay, this is just around non-oncology therapies, which again have a little bit easier pathway than some of the non-oncology gene therapies, the ones we just talked about. Next slide. I'm going to walk through this. These are the oncology CAR T therapies, the cellular therapies, which again are high price, not as high price, and sometimes get a much quicker access route than the non-oncology drugs. Next slide. Again, if you're imagining, there's a lot of arbitrariness in this. These are three gene therapies that are still waiting for negotiation on price. They've been sitting there for something like 2 years now. Patients wanting to get access, they can't get it because we haven't negotiated a price. And we don't know why we can't get a price negotiated. I've got one young man who needs to get it for thalassemia because the current therapy is blood transfusions about every 6 weeks. He has actually developed an inhibitor to the transfusion, so he can't really get the transfusions, but they won't give him the gene therapy. And we can't get a price on it. They can't give him the gene therapy because we can't get a price negotiated. The company has been willing to say, look, if you agree that you'll pay for it, we will just set a price and we will give them the therapy. When you get an actual negotiated price, we will readjust what we bill you for to the new pricing. Just give this child the drug. No, we can't do that. We don't know how to go backwards and change, the pricing on this. In many countries, these therapies are very expensive. You can amortize it. You know, like you do a mortgage. So, okay, it's very expensive. So why don't we do it over a period of time? Government says, we don't want to do amortization. We don't know how to do amortization. Because they're saying it's too expensive for our budget, but if we amortize it over 4 years, over 10 years, you can actually quite afford it, right? I can afford, you know, $100,000 a year. I just can't afford $1 million a year. Don't want to do it. I said, well, our financing isn't set up to manage this. I said, you got to be kidding me, right? You know, it's like a mortgage. You know how to do a mortgage. It's like you're building a hospital. Do you pay for the whole thing up front? No, you pay for it over time. This is the same thing. Don't want to do it. Some countries, this is the way, France, this is the way that you get these very expensive therapies in. You amortize it. You even can do it on what we call managed access basis. For instance, if we say the drug, you know, we can give it to you, it's supposed to last a lifetime. What if it doesn't last a lifetime? What if it fails after a few years? With an amortization scheme, the goal is that we do an outcomes-based agreement. I will give you a down payment, and then I will give you your payment every year, your annual payment, if the drug continues to work. If the drug doesn't work, we'll stop the drug and we'll stop the payment. Doesn't that make sense? Some of these drugs are on a managed access basis. The agreement is that we'll start the patients. They do this with some of the cancer drugs. If it works, the patient continues, and the government will pick it up. If it doesn't work, we just stop it, and you pay nothing. Still won't do it. So there are solutions that are here, but we need to make them happen. Next slide. So this is why we call for this rare disease drug strategy, because we saw over and over and over again, these were cases in which people couldn't get access to drugs in a timely fashion. And they were actually causing harm, but they were also creating tremendous damage in terms of the reputation of Canada. Next slide. Oh, I like to show this slide because we oftentimes hear, you know, we can't afford these drugs because they're so expensive, they're going to break the budget. But what you see here is, see that tiny little thing with the red arrow is? That's the cost of the public drug plan for rare disease drugs. See that gigantic bubble we've got on there? That's the public health spending. See all that stuff in between? That's the price we're paying for cannabis. It's the price we're paying for people in prisons. Not to say these aren't important, it's just to say in comparison, we're not talking about a very big part of the budget. If we funded every single person who had a rare disease with the drugs that are available, we're coming nowhere close to breaking the budget. So from a budget impact point of view, it's very small. Next slide, please. So this is kind of some of the expenditures. Next slide. Oh, one of the challenges we do have in Canada is compared to many other developed countries, Canada spends a lot less on rare diseases than many other countries. This is still a fact. So again, when we're talking about the huge impact of it, recognize our country's not doing what other countries are doing. We should be as good as the best of them. We should not be, you know, just slightly above some of the worst spenders. Next slide. So this is just what we're saying is that it really has come down to patient advocacy. I think we've had tremendous success in terms of patient advocates. You know, Steve was just telling me he's trying to get into an advisory board on one of the hospital boards there. I mean, we need to be able to not only do advocacy outside, which is what we do, we need to be able to do advocacy being at the table. We need to be able to do advocacy in terms of helping to negotiate kind of what the terms of those criteria are. We need to be part of the whole process. We're saying, okay, how do we make sure that these drugs are used well and that we're able to manage the impact to them? It's getting a lot better because I think we are getting recognition that patients need to be at the table, patients can have a valuable role, and that if we don't treat the patients as somebody who, you know, as a disruptive force, but as an actual participant, as a partner who can actually help us to get to the best outcomes, it really does help a lot. Next slide. So I finally get to the high point in this. So 2019, after a lot of advocacy, the Liberal government stood up and said, okay, we're going to bring in a $1 billion federal drug strategy. That's a pretty big deal. They allocated, you know, in the Treasury, $1 billion. Unfortunately, they went into election, the government shut down at that time. But luckily, they were reelected. And so they said, we will commit again to that $1 billion. Fortunately, 2020, when we should have been starting to negotiate, COVID came. And so we had nothing there for like 2 years, except for us. And some of you who were with us will know we campaigned And we did consultations over all those years of COVID to say, don't forget the rare disease strategy. Don't forget the promise. Here's what we recommend that you do with it. We hosted consultation after consultation. We presented plans to them. And finally, 2022, they held a consultation. 2023, they came back and they announced $1.5 billion over 3 years. Now, we wanted an overall rare disease strategy. They said we'll do a rare disease drug strategy. So the monies will go to drugs, which was not what we thought was the optimal use of it, but there's lots of things in it. There's funding for a common set of drugs, of which you, my lucky man, have one of your drugs in there. The other thing we have in there is that we have agreement that there will be better screening and diagnosis. Importantly, there's a follow-up. Because these are all drugs that come in with what we call that high level of uncertainty, we don't know how well it works, it's small clinical trials, patient population is highly varied, we don't have long-term data, we will track these patients as they're on the therapy, which is a very good thing because we will learn more about the drugs, how well they work, et cetera. So there's a lot in this drug strategy. It's just getting it activated to make sure that the governments will spend the money there. The monies are allocated. You know, there's some monies for research, there's some monies for registries, there's some monies for doing some work around real world evidence. The bulk of the monies, $1.4 billion, goes in bilateral agreements to the provinces. They get to decide how they're going to spend it based on some wide sets of criteria. So our job now has been to make sure that the monies are spent in the way that the agreement was set up to do, and to make sure that we get accountability from the provinces in how this money is spent. Easier said than done, because even the federal government says it's really hard to hold the provinces accountable for anything, but we're trying. Okay, next slide. So this is what we've done. We've got bilateral agreements on a list of 12 drugs, so I think only 8 of them are actually identified. But the good news, I would say, Stephen, we've had some talks with the companies, has it made a difference to be on this drug list? And one of the things they tell us is that the drugs were actually negotiated very quickly. Usually it takes months. One of the drugs on that list was negotiated even before the approval was done. So it appeared a number of days as opposed to months and sometimes years. The other thing they said was really remarkable is once the drug got an LOI, most of the provinces that were on that list actually began to make them available. So there's much shorter time. What we're wanting to do is to make sure, that there's the adequate follow-up. So one of the brilliant, pilot projects that, Dr. Salamani has been able to do out in BC with the VHL drug is to actually track the patients, collect the outcome data, and be able to return it back to be able to demonstrate how well does this drug work. That's what this drug strategy is supposed to be funding. How well it's doing that, we have not sure yet. We're supposed to be getting the results back from a provincial reporting to the federal government on how they're spending this money, by the beginning of next year. So our job, I sit as one of the co-chairs of the Implementation Advisory Group. Our job is to actually collect that information, to analyze it, and then hold the provinces accountable. And what we want to be able to do then is to actually have patients involved, as Stephen's doing in heading up the provincial advocacy programs, to be able to go in and talk to the governments and saying, here's what you promised to do, here's what we're supposed to be getting as outcomes, what are you actually doing? Here's what you're reporting you're doing. We need to have better accountability for it. So it's not easy. In many cases, federal government signs agreements with the provinces, the money goes in, and they have no accountability for it. They can spend it on. I remember a long time ago when they did primary care, the idea was to, increase the number of primary care physicians. When they did the accountability at the end of the day, there was one province that famously spent the money on lawnmowers. So, they can kind of spend it on whatever they want at the end of the day, but, our job is to hold them accountable. Our other goal, next slide. Okay, these are the list of drugs that everybody has signed on. That was the good news. All 10 provinces and 3 territories. It wasn't guaranteed that they were all going to sign on, but everybody signed on and says, give me money, and we will make sure that we're able to better spend it on rare diseases. Next slide. So this is the list of drugs there. Next slide. It's not, So this is kind of where you guys are, right? The question is, what impact will this have on the drugs that are coming in for amyloidosis, for ATTR? We don't know yet. But this is what we should be having. 60% of the monies is supposed to be spent on that first list of drugs. It gives us 40% of the monies. Part of it is on emerging drugs, on new drugs, so that we can, again, once we get some accountability, go back and say, where's that money? One of the things we are having patients say very clearly is when we get the pushback to say we don't have the money, say you do have monies. You in BC, you got $45 million. Ontario got $54 million. Don't tell me you don't have monies. We're hoping that we can use it for managed access schemes to say, get started on these drugs. We often get the pushback, we don't have the budget to bring in a new drug. Yes, you do. We've got budget. So we want to be able to leverage this money to be able to get some of these emerging drugs in, even as we need to collect information on it, to set up managed access agreements, to set up outcomes-based agreements, so that we can bring the drugs in even with, lesser information to be able to hold accountable. We have a report that's supposed to come out on this drug strategy on the first year of it. So 1 full year of everybody signing will be this coming spring. Hopefully we'll have some report to demonstrate. I will tell you, when this first happened, and Stephen will know this because we worked closely on it, I was very, very critical. I was almost caustically critical about where this drug went, because I did not really see it improving access to drugs for everybody. We now are going to have to work very hard to demonstrate what it has done. We need to make this a success, because we're in a position now to get to the second year. What are the recommendations? What do we need to do? We've only been in the program for 1 year. We've got another full year of it before we get done. And we've gotten a signal from the government that we can propose phase 2. And we want very much to propose phase 2, but we will need to work collectively to say what should be in it. What's our recommendation for phase 2? Again, we're very clear it's a drug strategy, but there's a whole lot that goes with a drug strategy. And as I've already said, the best way to get access to screening and diagnosis and the collection in terms of better access to care, specialist clinics. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're talking about here, having specialist networks, that we're talking about being able to do early screening and awareness, especially not just for newborns, but in being able to, as you talked about this morning, how do we get other practitioners to be aware of, what are the signs and symptoms, so that they will be able to pursue a possible diagnosis, as opposed to what we are finding still in Canada. It's taking 3, 5, 7 years to get a diagnosis for a condition, and especially for older patients, it takes even longer. And many misdiagnoses, which means, of course, you're not only not getting access to the right diagnosis and getting access to the wrong treatment, they're often being treated for the wrong thing, which, of course, is not very helpful. So we're hoping that, we can move forward in the second year, make some good recommendations around what it is that we want when we see the first report out, and we will begin the consultations for what phase 2 ought to look like. And I think, from our point of view, CORD will make a commitment to, again, do what we did in that first year leading up to the consultations, is bring the results back, let people see what's being done, get some critique on it, and actually be able to do the consultation. The promise was made is that it would be $1.5 billion for 3 years and $500 million a year after that. $500 million a year is not nothing. Even the cancer control strategy only gets $50 billion. So, we can do this. We can make some things, but we're going to have to advocate pretty hard, because, as you know, the government does not feel it's flush with monies at the moment. So we're going to have to make a case for it to demonstrate. We've just completed what we call a socioeconomic cost of illness drug study for rare diseases, being to show how much rare diseases cost families, and also cost the healthcare system, and that proper treatment, hopefully, may not cost less, but it will make sure the monies go to the right thing. So instead of you paying for a misdiagnosis and ending up in emergencies and getting all the wrong treatments, getting an early diagnosis gets you to the path of getting onto the right treatments, et cetera. So we want to be able to use that to say, obviously it costs, every illness costs. But the question is, can we better deploy the money so that we can make sure that if we're spending on getting better outcomes? I think that's the last slide. Oh, that was just our advocacy. Some of you were there with us. I love doing advocacy. I love doing advocacy in the rain. I love doing advocacy in the snow, because there's nothing better than having a group of people demonstrating, right, in really miserable conditions. If we're all standing out there in, bathing suits and the sun is shining, like nobody cares, right? But if you're standing out there like this and saying, yes, we really care, we're making a statement. So I love doing, sort of harsh advocacy, but we don't really want to have to do that. This is us still shouting from outside. We want to be at the table. We want to help negotiate. We want to come up with the best agreements. I may be out of time here. Okay, I think I'm just out of time. I'm happy to take a few questions if people want, but thank you very, very much.
Questions?
Yep.
Right beside you.
Thank you very much. I'm from British Columbia. The provincial government tells me I can advocate through a website called Your Voice. I feel incompetent to do that, but can I kind of help by putting in my input through there? And how else can I help advance the cause from a personal patient point of view? I just feeling incompetent.
You're definitely not incompetent. I think what we all need is good information. We need to be able to understand how the government works and what it is that we say that can be effective, right? My word of caution, and I don't mean to be negative about it, if they're offering you the opportunity to provide your voice, it probably doesn't matter. What you need to be able to do is to figure out, Stephen, we need to figure out what it is that we want to be able to say in a way that is going to be impactful. It's the same thing with the submissions into the CDA. We can make a submission. Do I think they do any good or not? I don't think so. But we will continue to make the submissions. I don't think it moves the needle. So I'm happy to talk to, it's important to do what they're offering you the opportunity to do, but know that that's not the only thing that you need to do, and it's not necessarily going to be the most effective thing you do. So we still have to advocate outside as well as inside.
Hi, Derhan. Thanks so much for that tremendous tour de force of advocacy and the work you and your organization are doing. Noel Fine, a cardiologist from Calgary. And I don't have a question, but what I want to do is just take a minute to acknowledge and thank you and your organization for just the tireless, tremendous work that you have done in the rare disease space year after year in Canada. And, I don't think a lot of people benefit from the work you and your organization have done. Some of them benefit immediately, directly, and know you personally, and then there's thousands of others that benefit and don't even realize it. And the rare disease space is interesting, of course, as you know, there's hundreds of rare diseases, right? And thousands of people and thousands of patients and people affected by it. And we're all kind of in our own kind of little world, right? We're very focused on what we do. And us in the amyloid world, for example, we don't necessarily know the Huntington's people and what they're going through. But what you and your organization have been able to do is kind of shine a light on the barriers to treatment, the often ridiculous barriers that we face in this country, make it understandable, and most importantly, bring us together and give us a platform to advocate for change together, so that and just show us the power that we have and that we're stronger together. So I just want to acknowledge that, and just you're an inspiration to all of us, and the legacy that you've created for getting better access for us in the rare disease spaces. So thanks very much to you and your organization for all the years of work.
That was probably overly kind and overly kind of giving us credit. It is the community. And I look around this room, right, and I know the people in this community, including Dr. Fine. I mean, I will give the praise back, because you don't always get physicians who want to be advocates, who are willing to stick their neck out, who are willing to not only do the clinical trials and do the work and support it, but also be an advocate. And one of the most important things we've done is actually make sure that we're aligned with the clinicians in what we do. So when I say your rare voice, right? Yes, do all that, but make sure then you understand what are all the other things that you can do and who are the other people we need to bring to the table. You know, the opportunities that they give us are fine, but we need to create a lot more opportunities, and you can only create that when the patient and the clinical community are working together. So huge thanks as well to you. So thanks everybody, really. You know, there's so much more that we can do, but I am forever optimistic, I think, in terms of we're going in the right direction. And even though it feels like very slow progress, we are making progress. So thanks a lot.